It all began on a late autumn afternoon, where tall grass swayed gently in the breeze, and time seemed to breathe slower over the quiet land called Ashbourne Hill, a secluded valley on the edge of Oregon. In an old wooden house at the end of a red dirt road, Venus, a 20-year-old girl with soft eyes and a soul made of sentences, sat by the window, quietly watching the fading light draw pale golden streaks across the wall. Venus once dreamed of becoming a writer, someone who captured the unnoticed and gave it meaning. But when Aunt Margaret, the woman who had raised and loved her since childhood, began coughing harder, unable to care for herself, that dream was folded away like a worn page. Medical bills climbed, and hope grew further out of reach. On a damp Friday afternoon, a thick ivory envelope arrived, with no return address. Inside was a marriage contract, written by the private attorney of Nathan Hale, a name once revered in the music world, known for orchestral works that left audiences breathless. But after a tragic accident took his wife, Nathan had stepped away from the stage, the city, and the questions. The contract was simple: a legal marriage for 1 year, no intimacy, no sharing of assets. In exchange, Venus would receive full medical treatment for Aunt Margaret at a private care facility. Only one condition: appear with Nathan at selected public events, maintain strict confidentiality, and do not terminate the agreement early. When Venus asked why her, someone he'd never met, the lawyer replied simply, "Nathan doesn't want someone who's already been seen. He chooses someone with blank spaces." That night, Venus sat beside her aunt's bed, listening to the faint, uneven breaths, her fingers clutching the envelope. She signed, not for the money, but because she was terrified of waking one morning with no one left to call her niece. The wedding took place on a gray Saturday morning, wrapped in a silence that felt damp and deliberate. The drawing room of the Hale estate was grand in size but stripped of any sign of joy. No music, no flowers, no vows. Just a wooden table, 3 witnesses, a legal official, and 2 strangers standing just far enough apart to stay untouched. Venus wore a white blouse and soft beige trousers. Her hair was loosely pinned back with Aunt Margaret's old silver hairpin. Nathan wore a charcoal coat, carried no ring, and offered her none. "This isn't a ceremony," he said softly, voice even and distant. "Just procedure." Venus nodded, and the moment her pen touched paper, she only heard the soft rustle of the document and her own heartbeat, steady but loud. In under 10 minutes, she became the legal wife of Nathan Hale, once a revered name in the music world, now a recluse living behind closed doors and unanswered questions. The mansion stood tucked between pine forests and fading lavender fields. It was a stone colossus, majestic but cold. High ceilings, pale, miscolored walls, endless hallways. Light streamed in through towering windows, washing the marble floor in silence. Every footstep echoed like memory. After the signing, the housekeeper quietly led Venus to the 3rd floor, her private quarters. The room was sunlit and simple. White curtains fluttered in the breeze. On the desk, a teacup still warm. The bed was dressed in cream linens. The wooden floors gleamed, and an armchair sat beside the window. Everything was perfectly placed, but emotionally vacant. No one pushed her to speak. No one asked questions. Nathan stood briefly at the doorway, gave her a polite nod, and walked away. His eyes didn't avoid hers, but they didn't meet them either, as if he too wasn't sure what part he played in this script. Venus stood still, fingers gripping the teardrop-shaped hairpin. Aunt Margaret once told her, "Every woman needs something to remind her who she is, even when the world insists she's nothing." She didn't know how she'd sleep that night in this unfamiliar room, in this unfamiliar life. But she knew one thing: she had chosen this, and now she would learn how to stay. The next morning, Venus woke early, unsure whether it was the pale light through the curtains or the faint bird song from the woods that stirred her. Despite barely sleeping, she felt alert, not rested, but present. She dressed and made her way downstairs. The breakfast table was already set. Rye bread, boiled eggs, coffee, orange juice. Everything arranged neatly, almost as if the order was meant to replace intimacy. Nathan sat at the far end of the table. He offered her a slight nod as she entered, and they both began to eat, in silence. No good morning, no small talk, just the soft clinking of silverware and the ticking of the wall clock. Then, without warning, Nathan spoke. "Did you know lavender smells different in the morning than it does in the evening?" Venus looked up, surprised. His gaze was fixed beyond the window, on the garden. "In the morning it's fresh," he said, "but by dusk it turns sharp, like memories left out in the sun too long." She didn't respond at first, but then gently a smile formed. Small but real. It was the first time she thought he might not be entirely unreachable, and for a fleeting moment, the house of stone seemed to breathe a little softer. That afternoon, the golden light draped itself over the moss-covered rooftops like a soft blanket over memories. Venus wandered slowly down the hallway of the first floor, eyes searching for a quiet space to write. She didn't want to tell a story. She needed to find her way back to herself through words. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was also too quiet. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that holds its breath. As if it had listened to too many confessions and buried them all in its beams and floorboards. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. Venus pushed gently. The hinges creaked, and a cloud of dust floated in the angled light. Inside was a room where time had paused. Not abandoned, just still. White sheets covered easels. Palettes sat stiff with dried paint. Brushes leaned against a worn table. The walls held unfinished paintings. A woman's hand, a mess of hair, downward eyes. All waiting for someone to return and complete them. She stepped in, touched nothing, just listened. The room whispered, then a faint sound behind her. Nathan stood at the door. He didn't speak. His expression wasn't guarded, nor warm. It was something heavier, like someone opening a door he hadn't touched in years. "My mother's," he said quietly. "She was a painter. I haven't been in here since she passed." Venus nodded, her eyes lingering on an unfinished portrait. The woman's gaze not yet drawn, as though searching for someone. "They look like they're still waiting," she said softly, "to be finished." He didn't reply. He simply exhaled, then stepped back. But this time, he didn't close the door. And for the first time, he didn't leave the room before her. That night, back in her own room, Venus couldn't sleep. The images from the art room lingered in her mind. Restless, she switched on the lamp, opened the desk drawer, and froze. There, tucked inside, was a vintage typewriter, its leather-toned body and round keys gleaming in the soft light. It looked untouched for years, but perfectly preserved. She pressed a key. It clicked, sharp and familiar. Someone had written here once. Someone had poured something important into this machine. She slid in a sheet of paper and began to type. Slowly, line by line. Not a full story, just a short journal piece. A memory of their first morning. The scent of lavender. The way Nathan looked out into the garden when he spoke. The next morning, she printed it, folded it neatly, and left it on the kitchen table beside the teapot. No name, no expectation. Days later, she returned to her room to find a handwritten page on her desk. Clean staff lines, clear notes. A short musical composition titled Silent Moment. No signature, but in the corner, one line was scribbled in soft ink. For the small things others forget to notice. Venus said nothing, but something in her shifted, like a key on a piano lightly pressed. From then on, they began a quiet kind of conversation. She wrote, snippets about the light, the sounds, the way shadows moved along the stairs. And he, now and then, left music, notes, messages barely longer than a thought, but unmistakably intentional. No one would call it friendship, no one needed to. But in the quiet distance between them, something had begun to grow. Slow, unspoken, and deeply felt. One quiet weekend afternoon, Venus was in the kitchen making tea when the housekeeper entered, holding a glossy magazine. On the cover was a black and white photo of Nathan by the window, light falling across his face, unaware he was being watched. Beneath it, a caption read, "A raw moment, photo by VB." Venus froze. It was a photo she had once taken with an old film camera. A quiet capture she had casually sent to a friend in the art world. She never imagined it would be published, and certainly not that, days later, a celebrity gossip site would leak their marriage contract. The news spread like wildfire through a dry lavender field. Headlines screamed, "Music genius and his young contract bride. Marriage for reputation? Venus. From countryside, nobody to woman behind the curtain." Nathan was furious. All evening he paced the library, phone buzzing nonstop. He wanted to sue, shut it all down. But Venus, after reading every article, every cruel comment, said softly, "If the truth has already been torn open, don't tape it back. Let them see all of it, not just the part they want to twist." They agreed to hold a press conference. No PR team, no defense speech. Just Nathan at the microphone and Venus in the front row, calm and unflinching. "Yes," Nathan began, voice firm and low. "We signed a contract." He paused. "But no line in that contract said she'd bring light into a house I thought had gone cold." Another pause. His voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "No line in it said she'd make me look back at myself." As they left the room, surrounded by camera flashes and murmurs, Venus reached for his hand, and for the first time, Nathan didn't pull away. That morning, the sky hadn't fully brightened yet. The window panes were still laced with mist. Venus sat on the sill, cradling a cup of tea gone cold. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Sanford Medical lit up the screen. She didn't need to open it to know. Aunt Margaret was gone. No screaming, no breakdown, just a quiet hollowness settling in her chest. Venus didn't cry right away. She just sat there, eyes unfocused, fingers gripping her aunt's silver necklace, as if it could hold on to a memory that was slipping through the breeze. Nathan didn't ask anything. When she handed him the phone, he read the message, nodded gently, and after that, he never left her side. 3 hours later, they were on the road, heading back to the wooden house where Venus grew up. She didn't speak during the entire drive. The wind slipped through the window, lifting strands of her hair. She didn't bother fixing it. In her hands, she held her aunt's old wool scarf, still faintly scented with mint. The funeral was quiet. A few relatives, a few neighbors. No dramatic weeping, only eyes that met in silent grief. Venus stood to speak, but as the first words left her lips, her voice broke. Nathan stepped forward. He didn't hug her, didn't hold her up. He simply placed a hand gently on her back, a quiet way of saying, "You are not alone." That afternoon after the funeral, the wooden house felt emptier than ever. No more chair scraping, no kettle whistle, no raspy voice reading the morning paper aloud. Venus curled into her aunt's old rocking chair, eyes red but dry. Nathan sat across from her, holding a cup of tea long gone cold. After a while, Venus whispered, voice tight, "She used to sit here every morning, with her glasses, reading slowly. Said it helped her remember how to see the world." Nathan stayed quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, confessional. "I never told anyone. My wife died in a mountain accident." Venus looked up. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was distant. We fought that day. She left alone, never came back. The silence between them shifted, no longer empty but resonant. He continued, softer. I thought I couldn't love again. I built walls, kept distance, made a contract with a stranger because it felt safer, quieter. Another pause. But then you came, and little by little I realized, I don't want you to leave. Venus didn't answer. She stood, walked toward him, slowly, as if stepping into a memory she hadn't dared to enter before. When she sat beside him, her hand found his, not to hold, but to stay. And in that quiet, hollow house, between two souls once shattered, for the first time, neither of them felt alone. They returned to the Hale estate on a soft summer afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting gentle moving patterns across the wooden floors. Neither of them spoke much during the drive, but nothing needed to be said. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer filled with hesitation. It was quiet and kind. The next day, Venus stepped into the old art studio, the room where she had first uncovered fragments of Nathan's past. This time, she didn't just stand and observe. She pulled the cloths off the unfinished paintings, wiped dust from the desk, and opened the windows to let the light flood in. A few minutes later, Nathan appeared at the doorway. He looked around the room as though recognizing something he hadn't allowed himself to see in years. I want to keep this room, Venus said without turning around. Not to preserve it like a museum, but to live with it. Nathan walked in, saying nothing. Together they began to clean, not hurriedly, not with a plan. Just simple movements, wiping each brush, rearranging the easels, rehanging old paintings on freshly cleared walls. Venus placed a small frame photo on the bookshelf, a portrait of Aunt Margaret, hair in a bun, eyes full of gentle laughter. Below it, she set a hand-carved wooden plaque with the words, Clarita's Room, the name her aunt used to sign love letters long ago. No one explained what it meant, but both of them understood. The space was no longer a room frozen in the past. It had become a part of the life they were building, together, by choice. After that, no one mentioned the contract again. It still sat in a drawer, untouched, but neither needed to look at it. Nathan began playing the piano again, not for an audience, but for the late afternoon when Venus sat nearby, writing quietly. She kept writing too, no longer as an escape, but as a way to hold on to the moments as they happened. One day as he was making tea, Nathan said softly, "We don't need anyone's approval anymore. You know that, right? We're far beyond that now." Venus didn't answer. She just looked at him. And for the first time, they both smiled. Not because something was funny, but because something had finally eased. Love doesn't always begin with a declaration. Sometimes it begins with quiet choices, made each day, in each gesture. And now they chose to stay, not because they had to, but because there was nowhere else they'd rather be. One late afternoon, sunlight spilled across the old books in the library, warming the dust on their spines. Venus was sorting through a stack of manuscripts when an email from the Visual Arts Center, Paris, popped up on her screen. She sat still, not opening it at first. The subject line felt like a door opening in the middle of a very calm life. Her application had been accepted, 3 months in Paris, a private writing studio, full fellowship. She remembered sending the application, a quiet night early in her stay at the Hale estate, when everything still felt like borrowed time. It was a moment of daring, like tossing a handwritten note into a vast sea. She never really thought it would be answered, but now that it was, she felt unsteady. That evening, over a quiet dinner of pumpkin soup and toast, she watched Nathan pour tea, then said softly, "I've been invited to Paris. 3 months. I got accepted." Nathan set the teapot down gently. He didn't look surprised, just ready. "And do you want to go?" he asked, voice low and calm. Venus hesitated. She looked down, then met his eyes, shining with longing, but shadowed by doubt. I do. I really do. But I'm scared. Scared to leave you. Scared that everything might shift. Nathan smiled, not to reassure, but to understand. You don't have to stay to prove anything, he said. I don't need you beside me every day to feel loved. He held her gaze. I just need to know that you're living what's true to you. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. A trembling smile touched her lips. I'll come back, she said. And every week, I'll write you a letter. Long or short, but real. Nathan nodded. And I'll wait. No matter what each day looks like, I'll wait for your words. The morning of her departure, mist wrapped around the airport entrance like a soft veil. Nathan walked slowly beside her, not speaking much, but making every step count. At the security gate, he handed her a small box wrapped in gray linen. Inside was a vintage travel camera, light, compact. On its metal body, a faint engraving read, "So you'll never forget how you see the world, or how I see you." Venus held the camera close, eyes red but dry. She looked up, smiling gently. I'll capture everything. The cafes, the rooftops, even the ache. I'll send them to you. Every week with the letters. Nathan squeezed her hand softly, his eyes autumn warm. No filters, he said. I want the world exactly as you see it. In the weeks that followed, they lived in 2 cities, 2 time zones, 2 rhythms. But not once did they drift. Every Monday morning, Venus sent a typed letter from the tiny studio in Paris. Some were long, filled with thoughts. Others were just a few lines. It rained today. Or, there's a cafe here with paintings that remind me of your house. She included photos, sunlight through shutters, stone staircases, strangers' faces. Nathan read them all, studied them. Sometimes he played piano late at night, reimagining the places through her eyes. On weekends, they video called, sometimes just to be present, to share silence, not dramatic, not desperate. But in that quiet distance, they touched something deeper, a love that didn't need presence to be real. 3 months wasn't a lifetime, but it was long enough to teach a heart where it belongs. As the plane descended into San Francisco, Venus pressed her palm to the cold window, watching the city glitter under a pale post-rain sunrise. She didn't carry much, just a backpack, her old camera, and a few unfinished manuscripts. But inside, she held more than she could ever pack. She had lived, she had written, she had learned that sometimes to love someone fully, you have to leave. Not to run, but to return, whole. Nathan stood waiting at the airport, leaning casually against a glass wall near the arrivals gate. He didn't carry flowers, nor a sign. Just his coat, his patience, and a gaze that softened the moment he saw her. They didn't run, didn't cry, they just walked. And when the space between them narrowed to a breath, Venus stopped, looked up at him, and whispered, I'm home. Nathan didn't speak at first. He only pulled her into his arms and held her close. After a moment, his voice broke softly against her hair. I know, Shroom. They returned to Ashbourne Hill that same evening. The house still stood quiet and tall, a witness to everything they'd carried into it. But it no longer felt like a shelter for pain. It felt like a place to begin again. Not from the start, but from exactly where they had paused, this time together. Days passed, then weeks. Mornings shared over warm tea, afternoons spent reading beneath the old oak. Evenings filled with music Nathan once only played for memories, now for presence. They didn't speak of restarting. They simply continued, with more softness, more surety. And then, 5 years slipped by, the way wind slips through lavender. Gently, quietly, but completely. The Hale estate had changed, not its structure, but its soul. In the backyard stood a wooden swing tied to a maple tree. The kitchen smelled like cookies. Small footsteps echoed down the long halls every morning. The house no longer held only two people who had survived loss. It now held a world for two children. A little boy, about 4, curly brown hair, carefully held the hand of his younger sister as they walked between rows of blooming lavender. Both were barefoot, their feet dusted with pollen. The girl clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide in the golden light. The boy leaned down, whispered something, and she burst into laughter, bright and bell-like under the afternoon sun. On the stone porch, Venus and Nathan sat side by side, each with a cup of tea. Nathan's hair was streaked with silver. Venus's gaze was quieter now, deeper, not from sadness, but from fullness. She watched the children, then murmured, voice almost lost in the breeze. "I used to be afraid I wouldn't belong anywhere." Nathan didn't look at her. He was still watching their son bend down to tie his sister's shoe, but he squeezed her hand gently, his voice as steady as the maple they sat beneath. "Now you have an entire world." And it was true, not a world of bright lights or grand stages, but one made of quiet moments. Children's laughter, lavender blooms, and two people who had once been lost, now sitting side by side in the only place they ever needed to be. Time did what it always does, passed quietly until one day it became 5 years. And in those 5 years, the Hale estate transformed not in stone, but in spirit. The days were no longer counted in hours, but in moments, like slow-motion frames of a sunlit film. Nathan often sat by the old piano, fingers gliding over the keys, composing melodies that never needed to be completed. His music wasn't for solitude anymore. It was for warmth, to let the walls breathe with life. Across the room, Venus sat at her writing desk by the window, her hair loosely tied, her hands dancing across her typewriter. She didn't write about love. She wrote from love itself, from the life unfolding quietly around her, in details so small no one else would see, yet everything was made of them. Outside in the garden, children's laughter echoed through the lavender air. Their two children ran between rows of soft violet bloom, the girl's dress fluttering in the wind, while her older brother held a toy camera, pretending to capture every fleeting second. Sometimes they lay on the grass, whispering secrets only kids could understand. Other times they simply sat, letting the breeze pass gently through their hair. That was their life, simple, unscripted, but deeply complete. No one needed to say forever every day. They proved it by choosing each other again and again in the tiniest of ways. Nathan making tea just how Venus liked it, Venus saving his favorite seat by the window each afternoon. It was in the glance they shared when the sky shifted, in a good morning that always came with the smell of warm toast. Love, it turned out, wasn't made of grand words, but of the quiet decision to stay, today, tomorrow, always. One late afternoon, the last light spilled through the leaves in golden threads across the old porch tiles. Their son, now 7, stepped out, holding a small brown leather notebook, the kind Venus used to write in. He said nothing, just walked, straight into the lavender field, through rows swaying in the soft wind. The sunlight touched his shoulders like a quiet blessing. From the porch, Venus watched him. Nathan came to stand beside her, quietly taking her hand. Nothing needed to be said. Nothing needed to be explained. And in that moment, with music fading like memory, chamomile lingering like hope, and their children's laughter dancing on the wind, Venus wondered, could this really be the life she once feared she'd never belong to? Yet somehow she had written it, one quiet choice at a time. Her voice echoed softly, like a memory too gentle to forget. Maybe love doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it just blooms quietly, in the middle of a lavender field at dusk,